Hello, this is XChange Master Faculty Member Steve Bouchard. And in this video here today, I'm going to talk to you about how we're using the XChange approach to really revolutionize and transform the industry conference and convention space. If you're not familiar with XChange, I'll post some links down below where you can get some other resources and videos from our website on what XChange is and some of the founding principles and how we apply that work in other ways. But for today, right now, I'm going to jump into a little drawing here that's going to show you how we really apply XChange in the learning community environment. And again, how we're specifically using it in industry conferences and conventions to really transform the experience and generate deeper levels of engagement with the audience, deeper levels of learning, and just overall better experiences when we bring people together. And so what we've found through our work in teams and organizations and also learning communities is that there's kind of three levels of the work that we do. And at the first level, we talk about designing and really facilitating any kind of an event or experience. And so what does that actually mean? And when we talk about design, it's really designing the questions that are going to guide many of the activities that we move our participants through. Because with the XChange approach, many of our activities really start with a question, and we put a lot of thought and time and design work into the right questions to generate the right ideas and the outcomes. And then, of course, part of the design process is also, building an effective agenda that's going to create value not only for the people that are together in the room, but also whoever's bringing them together, whether that's a leadership team, whether it's an industry, whether it's a convener. And so we put a lot of time and emphasis around designing agendas and designing questions. When we come to the facilitation part of the experience, it really comes down to three things. First is, how do you move and manage people through an agenda and move them and manage them both physically, but also mentally, right? How do you make sure that people are well prepared mentally in the right headspace to answer the questions and have the dialogue that we're asking them to have, but also making sure you can move different size groups of people. And the nice thing about the XChange approach is that it's very scalable, right? So we do this work at the small level with 20, 30 people. We also apply it at a very large level with hundreds or even thousands of people in the room. And so knowing how to do that is super important. And then we spend a lot of time and attention on the environment that we're bringing people into. And so things like, access to the outdoors, access to fresh air, natural light, plants and other reminders of nature in the room, things like that that really set the stage to bring in the right mindset and put people at ease and make them comfortable and really use the space most efficiently for whatever task we're trying to create. And so we like to say that as people enter the room, everything they see, hear, and feel is important. And so we make sure to pay attention to that and design the spaces where we bring people together to meet to best serve whatever outcome we're trying to generate. And then lastly, there's the element of time. And so how do you manage, the agenda? How do you manage the people in the room to be sure you move through the important parts of your agenda and deliver on the outcomes that you need to deliver on for the client and the folks in attendance? And so we have, ways that we can scale activities to compress time or expand time depending on what's available. And then also having the knowledge of what's most important for our clients and for the people in the room to experience or to generate before we go into the event. And that's all part of the pre-planning process. And so that's kind of what's happening. We sometimes say above the surface, you're looking at design and facilitation, but there's really some really important things that the XChange approach leverages below the surface. And the first thing I want to talk about is the three different types of capital that we've identified that exist within learning communities. And the first is really intellectual capital. And intellectual capital is really, why people show up in the first place, right? They're coming to these types of convenings, conferences, events to learn, right? To get new ideas and to grow, whether that's personally or professionally. That's why people show up, right? The second type of capital is what we call relational capital. And relational capital is a little bit different in the sense that it's all about kind of networking, right? Building relationships and coming together around a shared purpose. So many times we bring people together around a specific industry, around a specific task or challenge or opportunity area. And so there's some level of connection that then exists around that shared purpose. And again, these two first types of capital, intellectual and relational, are largely, why people show up to these events. But as an event organizer, a meeting planner, a conference convener, I'm sure that you've seen and can relate to the fact that it's getting more and more difficult to bring people together in these live environments, right? Because there's so much information out there and available on the web, in the internet, different virtual learning opportunities. And so how do you get people to really, invest the time, the energy, the resources, the money to come to an event? And we think that we have the answer through our complete convention or conference 3.0 model. And so the third type of capital that we like to leverage is what we call communal capital. And communal capital, somewhat simply defined, is really the feeling of being part of something bigger, part of something larger, part of a bigger journey, part of a bigger organization. And while intellectual capital and relational capital are why a lot of times people show up, what we found through our work is that communal capital is really what keeps people engaged. It's what makes them stay, or it's what makes them come back and return time and time again for these types of events. And really at the basis of this pyramid here, and really the foundation of our work, is something called psychological safety, which really has been around for quite some time with Amy Edmondson's work at Harvard. There was a study in 2012, the Aristotle Project by Google, where they studied what are the key elements of a high-performing team or high-performing organization. And psychological safety was identified as the one most important element for high-performing teams and organizations. And then just last year, the XChange organization and the Change Lab did a report that surveyed over 7,000 workers in North America. And some really compelling data was presented in that report as far as what drives engagement and what makes for successful change initiatives. And so psychological safety is really the basis of what's happening in our events. And that's really what we, who use XChange, develop our events around creating psychological safety and then leveraging and tapping into these three different types of capital: intellectual, relational, and communal capital simultaneously through the events that we lead. So, what does all of this mean? What does it actually look like in practice? What I'm going to do now is actually show you 3 or 4 different ways that we tactically bring this into events. And so if I talk a little bit about, the conference experience, we sometimes refer to conference 1.0 as, really a passive experience. So think about people sharing insight, speakers from stage, people in the audience listening and receiving information, new ideas, etc. And nothing wrong with that, right? There's great information to be had. There's many lives that have been changed, and there's many insights that can be received through passive information delivery. And so that can be a great thing. What we found, and what most people have found, is that there's a need for some other type of interaction, right? Some other type of activity or event that really builds that second type of capital, that relational capital. And so, sort of a 2.0 experience basically adds in some networking. And so you're all familiar with the cocktail hours, the networking events where people come together, after hours typically, and share and make connections and all of those things. And so most of the conferences that are out there today are a combination of these two things, right? Some passive learning, insight being shared from speakers or subject matter experts on stage, and then mixing in networking, at various times throughout the program or throughout the conference. The challenge with the networking is that in many cases, 2 things. One, most of the time, 1 out of 2 people are very uncomfortable in that kind of an environment. And I'm sure there's some people who are watching this video who can relate to that, where you've been in those networking environments and you're just not really sure how to have a good conversation, not really sure what to ask for. If you don't know anybody, it makes it that much more difficult. So the networking events tend to be not real effective, and there's usually not much structure to them. And so the outcome of those events is sometimes hard to grasp. Secondly, they tend to be expensive, right? There tends to be cocktail hours or activities or different types of trips that people go on. And so there can be a lot of money invested without a lot of return, or at least quantifiable return. And so what we talk about at XChange is really transforming that conference experience into what we call Conference 3.0, or the complete convention. And what I'm going to do now is just show you a couple different ways that we actually do that in practice. And so, when we take the first step, it's really moving from a passive experience to an active experience. So how do we do that? Well, one of the ways that we do that very simply and very effectively is through what we call an active learning cycle. What does that look like? It's basically asking folks in the conference experience to go through some kind of a written exercise, right? So take a moment, pause, grab a pen and a paper, and write down what you just learned from that experience. Write down your biggest takeaway from that speaker you just heard on stage, and really take the time to capture that. We then get people to go into what we call a small group share. And so either turn to the person next to you in a pair, or maybe form a small group of 3 or 4 people and just share with each other what your biggest takeaways were. What was the biggest thing that you learned through that experience, that speaker, that event? And then what we do is we actually bring and invite those voices, those learnings, into the whole room through what we call a large group share. And so we'll invite people to share what they learned, what their biggest takeaways were within that group with the whole room. And so what we've done there in a very brief period of time, this can be facilitated, by a trained XChange facilitator very time effectively in as little as 15 or 20 minutes. We've allowed people the time and the opportunity to really reflect on what they've learned, to capture it in writing, to share it with another person verbally, and then invite those shares into the room so that everybody can benefit from it. So we really amplify the learning in that fashion. The other step that we take after moving from passive to active is moving from expert wisdom to what we call crowdsourced wisdom. And so what does that mean? Typically we talked about having a subject matter expert or somebody speaking on stage. And that can be a great thing. But think about, too, when you bring together 200, 300, 400, 500 people into a room around some shared purpose, some shared interest, there's going to be a lot of talent, skill, life experience in that room that oftentimes goes, untapped. And that's sometimes a missed opportunity. And so I'll give you here 3 quick ways that we are able to really tap into that collective wisdom, that group genius, we call it, within the crowd. And you can then shift away from so many, crowds, experts on stage, subject matter experts, and really leverage what's already in the room. And so one way we do that is through what we call a one-on-one paired interview. And so what we do is we design some very thoughtful questions that tap into people's skills, people's purpose, people's strengths, what's working really well. And we give people time and space to really interview each other and learn from one another around the topics that are of most benefit to them. Some of the things that we tend to focus in on can be purpose, right? What's your purpose in being in this organization? What strengths might people have? We oftentimes bring in future visions, could be values, or sometimes we'll refer to those as guiding work principles. And then also intentions, right? So what's your intention for our time together? And these can all be great questions that we interview. And then what happens is after people interview each other one-on-one, they'll then percolate that learning even further by finding another pair, introducing one another to each other with a structured way that we have that happen, and then going from 2 to 4. And that's a very powerful exercise and typically gets really good feedback. It allows people to create deep connection, shared purpose, a really great way to start any kind of an event. Another opportunity to tap into or access the wisdom in the room is what we call vote up. And so in this activity, we would bring together small groups of people and we would have them share stories or share ideas, around something very specific that we pose and present to them. And what happens is people will go around, and there's a lot of things that you can build this around, right? You could share ideas, you could share lessons or best practices, you could share values, you could share strengths. You could even share, people, right? Share people's stories. And what happens is the group all shares what they have to contribute. And then as a group, they determine what's the best story within their group, what has the most energy, what might the whole room benefit most from hearing. And then we bring those stories into the room. And so out of a group of 4 or 5 people, you get the highest energy, most beneficial, most high impact ideas to then be shared with the whole room. And that's, again, something that a trained XChange facilitator can move a large group of people through very quickly. And some of the things that come out of that, the learning, the takeaways, the golden nuggets, can be really, really powerful. The last method that I'm going to go over here today in this video is what we call a real-time value exchange. And there's a number of different ways that you can actually facilitate this this activity. And so I'll give you one example here. Sometimes we conduct this around what's called an ask, give, win. And so we'll organize people in a semicircle in front of a wall, and we'll set up 3 different kind of categories or 3 different columns that have these hashtags: ask, give, win. And you could modify that to be a number of different things, but I'll just use this example for simplicity. And then we give people some time to write down, whether it's questions that they have or topics they want to learn about, whether it's a skill set they have or an area of expertise or a success story they want to share around something specific, or if they just want to celebrate a win, right? They want to acknowledge something that they or maybe somebody else in the community was very successful at. And sometimes, we don't take as much time as we should to recognize our own wins. So we'll give people time to capture those things down, and then we orchestrate a really high momentum, kind of rapid process where people walk up, announce what it is that they want to ask, give, or celebrate, and they just post it on the wall. And we have a methodology that we use that allows people to track who needs help with what, who has an area of expertise they're willing to share, and who has a celebration they want to acknowledge. And what happens there is we create some connections very quickly around things that people need support with, and those that might be able to provide that support in the community. We also recognize the wins and the successes, and that makes everybody feel really good and gives them an opportunity to maybe identify, hey, you had success in that area. That's something I want to try and pursue. Maybe I'll connect with that person and learn a little bit about how they were so successful. And so typically when we facilitate that activity, at the end of it, we ask people to make at least 2 connections with somebody here in the community, in the event, where you can either ask them for help, or you can support them in some way, or you can learn together from a win or a success story. And so it's a way of really creating great connections rapidly, giving people the opportunity to connect either there in real time and have discussion, a great activity to do right before a meal, or that they can even just follow up. Hey, at some point in the next 30 days, let's get a call on the calendar, let's get a coffee where we can meet and discuss this topic. So those are 3 different ways that you can tap into the wisdom of your community: through one-on-one paired interviews, through a vote-up process, through a real-time value exchange. And then there's, of course, the active learning sequence, which really helps to just shift learning from passive to active. There is one other element here that we talk about sometimes, a 3.3 element, but I'll save that for another video and leave you with this here today. So if you have any more questions on how to actually implement this in an industry convention or conference that you might be convening, feel free to reach out and set up a call, and we can have a discussion to learn more. Thanks so much, and hope you had a good outcome from this video. Take care, everyone.